Hello, and welcome to Minority Matters. I'm Sylvester Smith, your host. We honor and recognize the hundreds of people who have sacrificed their lives in an effort to shape our country into a place where, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it, people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In this program, we're going to discuss whether or not we currently live in a post-racial America and ponder the question, does race matter? And if so, what is its relevance? Joining me for this discussion are Dale Charles, who is with the Arkansas State National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, Dr. Fernando Restrepo, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Community at the University of Arkansas, and Anthony Hendrix, the pastor of Mosaic Church of Conway. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Now, in the introduction, I mentioned Dr. King. His commitment, sacrifice, and impact on America could never be overstated. But kind of as a foundational point in this conversation, I'd like to read an excerpt from his final speech, the April 3rd, 1968 mountaintop speech, as we call it, that he gave during the sanitation worker strike. And I'm going to start at the end, actually. He said, "We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." As we all know, on April 4th, 1968, the very next day, Dr. King was assassinated. I think the foundational question for this discussion is, has Dr. King's vision become reality? Here in 2014, when we live in a nation in which we not only have an African-American president, but an African-American president that has been twice elected by a majority of Americans, are we in the promised land? I'm going to start with you, President Charles. Are we in the promised land? Do we live in a post-racial America?
No, we do not. We have made a lot of accomplishment, but I think we are a long ways from Dr. King's vision and his speech that you just read the excerpt from. And there's a number of reasons why I could say that, and I'll address more as the show goes on, but I think that even this week, the President of the United States of America came out and admitted that he is still having difficulty, not because of what he knows, what he done, but the color of his skin. He has been long not want to get into that conversation, but something caused him to enter into it over the weekend. And if he has tried as much in his power not to make those type comments, and he made them, then it says a lot. But as you look across America and you look across the state of Arkansas, there's a lot of progress that's been made, but there's a lot of injustice still exists within this community, within this state, and within this nation.
Pastor?
No, I don't believe that we have made it to the promised land. To use that same analogy, I would say that we're probably right outside of Jericho, which was the promised land. We still have a ways to go. I think there are a number of strides that we've made in this country, but by and large, we still have a ways to get to his dream. And his dream was not necessarily just for the African American to advance, but his dream was, along with the African American and his advancements, that we would have what he called the glorious community. And what that community was all about was the fact that all nations, all races would come together and experience the American dream together. And we are still a far distance from that particular goal, the dream that he had.
Yes, and I would say we've done some progress in some areas specifically, specifically of having a set of frameworks of legislation that protect, that are really out front public assault on individuals based on the race is no longer possible, or at least it has a cost. But on the other side, we've seen other forms of inequality, basically access to certain resources, whether it's higher education and so forth, that have divided us much more. And basically, and sometimes they have some implications of the previous racial division in America.
Sylvester, you know, that speech, he said, we as a people. He didn't say we as black folks.
That's right.
He said, we as a people. That means he was including everybody. And throughout his life and teaching, he was about bringing justice and equity to everybody. You know, he made that I Have a Dream speech in 1963 on March on Washington, and talked about his 4 little children would be judged by their character and not the color of their skin. And he understood that America had not yet gotten to that point, but that was his hope and that was his dream. And he indicated in a lot of the speeches that once, when we achieve that, we'll be a better society, and a lot of the issues that we fight about every day will no longer be a fight. We can move on to some more issues that's going to affect us all. But right now, he was talking about those who was left out, locked out because of the color of their skin. And a lot of people misunderstand what he was saying and what he was talking about. He was just talking about justice and equality. And he talked about this great United States of America, the Constitution, everybody have a right to do this and right to do that, yet that people of color was denied those opportunities. And he thought that that should be cleared up first, and we all together can move forward, opposed to some moving forward and some being held back.
Well, let me say this, because one of the goals that I always have, myself and the production team here for this show, is to make sure that we represent every vantage point. And I want to be clear to the audience that we did search high and low to find a person, regardless of what color or gender, who would come on here and say that we have reached the post-racial America. But since we couldn't find that person, I think I'll have to, my job as host will be to represent all the viewpoint that's missing. So then I'll challenge the panel and ask each of you, how can you, first of all, I think the secondary question for this discussion is, what does it mean to be in a post-racial America? Because my experience as Americans suggests that if the Pollyanna-ish thought that race will be completely irrelevant and everyone will be colorblind, I don't think that is a realistic possibility for our country, because the racial differences will always play some factor, in my opinion, in our lives. But I think the better question is, have we reached a place in which your race does not become an obstacle for you achieving whatever it is your dream may be? And when you put that in context into the America of the 1950s and 60s, you know, people of color couldn't even vote in some places. And then you had the Voting Rights Act. And now we live in a nation in which, as I said in the intro, we have an African-American president who has twice been elected. We've got an African-American Attorney General. African-Americans and Latinos, I believe, are CEOs of 16 of the Fortune 500. So in this America, in that context where minorities are thriving in the upper echelon of politics, business, and government, you know, how can we say that we aren't really in a post-racial America?
Well, when you go back, and I'm glad you brought that, when you go back and start to looking at the 2012 election, during 2012, 2011, we had 35 states to put in some type of voter suppression law to prevent minorities from voting. And those states that institute those laws was trying to deny people access to the ballot. There was a report that just came out on yesterday where President Obama lawyer Mick Romney, lawyer, was chairman of this committee and went back and did a study of the very thing I'm talking about in the laws. And they came back with the conclusion that too many impediments had been put in place to disenfranchise poor people and people of color from voting. So why would you do that when people has gone to every war of color that we can name and sacrificed their lives for this country? And as we speak today in Iraq and Afghanistan, done the very same thing. And their report was saying, down in Florida, they were standing in line 3 and 4 hours, and they were saying it was downright unthinkable for anybody that had to stand in line more than 30 minutes in order to vote. Those are impediments that be put in place by people in power to disenfranchise some other nationality or ethnic group. So that in itself says a lot. Then let me go back to the in June of 2013, the United States Supreme Court struck down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act and says we done elected a black president 2 years, we no more have voting issues. Well, after they did that, Texas and North Carolina put in the most suppressive voting rights laws to prevent people from voting in this country. So although we elected a black president, that don't mean that all the way down the equation that things are better and just.
Now, would you call the Arkansas Voter ID Act, would you call that a
Yes.
suppressive act?
Yes, very suppressive.
Now, you said earlier that, the vision was for people to not be left out and locked out. How are you locked out of the process when all you have to do to participate is have an ID?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question. A similar law was passed, and the judge struck it down in Philadelphia last week, similar to Arkansas. In Arkansas, a study came out just about a month ago that we ranked #1 in the 50 states of people going to bed hungry. In Arkansas, 1 out of every 3 children go to bed hungry. We put a law into place supposed to have caused us to put in place about voter fraud. We couldn't name a single case of voter fraud. We spent $300,000 to implement this law, yet we have 1 out of every 3 children going to bed hungry every night. We got children in Arkansas that on Friday they have to get a backpack and they prepare food for them to take home and have something to eat over the weekend.
No, I'm well aware of that, President Charles, but that doesn't answer the question how a requirement to have an ID keeps someone from participating in the election process.
Because many of us...
Because the ID is free. You can get it for free.
No, you can now. That's money spent and it wouldn't necessarily have needed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's free, but now that's part of that law. The other part of that law is in the rural counties in Arkansas, they may not have but 1 or 2 voting precincts. If you go to the poll, we just saw it in Jonesboro. We just had an election in Jonesboro last week. In Jonesboro, there was going to be a number of votes thrown out because they went to the poll to vote and didn't have their ID, and they had to come back to the poll with that ID in order for their vote to count. Well, why not just let them vote like they was born before? So that was a means to suppress people's vote.
All right, well, let's move on a little bit because we've actually used up half our time. Pastor Hendrix, what's going on in the church? Because we've heard for years that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week in America.
Yeah.
Are we making progress, or is Sunday still the most segregated day?
It's a very, very slow process. I think what we're seeing is we still have on Sunday mornings, it's still the most segregated day of the week. And it's because, going back to your earlier question, have we reached the post-racialized society? No, I don't believe we have. And I think it's because we have depended on laws for years when we've been trying to legislate racial reconciliation since the 1800s. And until we begin to legislate people's hearts, I don't believe that we're going to get to a post-racial society, because that's all built around relationship and me understanding your race, your culture. And until we get to that place, people are still going to vote. They're going to make laws and rules because they don't understand the other side. And until you get into community which I believe is what the church's responsibility is to bring people into community so that we can experience community together, so that I now understand your culture, I understand your ethnicity, I understand your race. And so now I'm going to fight for laws for you because you're my friend, you're my brother in Christ. And so now I have a basis by which I want to make some changes in this country. And by and large, that's still not happening because, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I believe the church is still part of, well, let me say it this way. To this day, the church is the only remaining segregated institution in this country. And that's a sad fact as a pastor to say, but it's true. And I believe until we, the body of Christ, and the Bible says that we have been given this ministry of reconciliation, but yet we are still the only segregated institution in this country. I don't believe this country will move forward until the congregations begin to address this issue. And by and large, we're still either afraid or too angry to address this issue from the perspective of Christ, which will then get the rest of this moving towards that post-racial society. At this particular point in time, we're still there. I mean, I think we have probably in this country, if I know the numbers correctly, probably about 12% of the congregations in the entire nation would be classified as a multicultural church, and that means more than 20% of the body is another race, another ethnic group.
With what Pastor just stated is the blueprint for the rest of the world to come in. Now, I know what he's saying, and I believe that those statistics may be lower than that. Until that happens, then ain't nothing else going to be right. And he talked about laws, passing laws is one thing, but legislating in the heart is the issue that he just addressed.
Yeah.
And if we had that high percentage of people segregating themselves and reading the same Bible that everybody else is reading and saying we're on our way to heaven, then that in itself tells you why all these other problems are still lingering out here.
Yeah.
So we got a long ways to go. And that was part of Dr. King's speech too.
That's right.
What the pastor just alluded to.
I would add to that conversation that for us and for many Latinos, we look up really for all the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement from the black churches, because the youth were being trained there in civic participation. And I don't see that much, for example, for the Catholic community, although the Latinos are growing in Catholics in the U.S. But I see it as still kind of divided, or a very folkloric approximation to it, not an engagement on let's try to change this. Although there is an openness, let's be supportive of immigrants and so forth, but on training the youth, that we're the ones that were out there walking the streets and risking their lives. I see that, historically that's been the leadership of a very significant contribution. But changing the heart is what I think is at the core of education. And if I go to my corner of the world, which is education and higher education, we're not past the post-racial society in terms of, we look, for example, the ACLU just did a special in their magazine on 1964, 50 years after. What have we done? In education, there's still nationally, minorities are really looked up in the schools more in kind of disciplined and out of school days. So, and then if you look at the level of incarceration too for African Americans and Latinos is higher. So there's some things there that are already affecting more significantly at groups that have been historically racialized. And then we have the achievement gap. We look in Arkansas, the ACT, the level of college access, you still have a long way to do. The question is, is race quotas and affirmative action specifically the only way we're going to remedy those injustices? Or maintaining those race quotas is actually continuing the racial injustice or something, or maintaining or discriminating against others? So you're maybe benefit one group and maybe doing an injustice to another groups. And that's been the whole challenge to the Supreme Court on the race admissions based on race.
That's a great question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on President Charles. Racial quotas and affirmative action programs, are they discriminatory against the majority?
I would say no. It's kind of like if you're playing a game of sports, and Pastor Anthony here has rules and regulations that I have to comply with, and he doesn't have to comply with. We play in the same game. See, we have let people spend racial quotas and all that. It's my understanding that the quotas, and people label them quotas, I lay them level the playing field. If we are unrepresented at this job, and you and I have the same qualification, then the law says since we're underrepresented in my race, then we have the equal qualification, then the underrepresentation would have first choice. That's not a quota. We got the same ability. We scored the same on the test. We have this, come from the same school. We have the same education standard. But so how we both scored the same. And since my race is underrepresented, then the preference would go to me and then the other person. Then that's not a quota. That's trying to bring up the playing field. The question has been asked, why did we have the underrepresentation in the first place? July 4, 1776, when you go back and start looking at race, been years infested of unlevel playing field. So at some point, if you say that we're going to be equal, you got to try to level the playing field. Give everybody opportunity.
But that argument has been struck down by the Supreme Court in admissions to law school in Texas and Michigan. And so basically the argument for the leveling the field has been discriminating against some poor white applicants. So it's been struck down. Now the conversation then moved into the question of diversity. That diversity doesn't have to be race-based, but it will just enrich the overall experience. So by that argument, and the problem is in the courts. How is this is defined by the courts? I understand that the level of education is, for example, when we think about education, but this could be also for employment. It's a very difficult decision. The other one would be to remedy past injustices. So that's kind of with the three arguments. Michael Sandel in his book on justice goes on those 3 points, and we're pretty much hung up right now on the diversity. That diversity contributes to enrich everyone's experience, whether it is in a job that is reaching to market. But that sometimes is shortcoming because it's utilitarian. I can use some of this and some of this, but it's thinking of how it will benefit, whether you're selling better or not to a specific community.
I'm going to interrupt you. We've got 3 minutes left. And I know the time has gone by, but that's because it's been a great panel and an excellent topic. Let's spend our last 3 minutes talking about solutions. What can we do to move the ball further down the field towards the goal that I think we all agree is America, where race truly is not an obstacle for anyone? In the religious community, Pastor, what can we do to bring people together on Sundays?
I think it's what we're doing at Mosaic, and that is making the hard choices to get in and worship together. It's not an easy thing for us to be a multi-ethnic church, because there are different. We bring in different cultures. We bring in different ways we've been raised, and we work together under the auspices of the cross to make this thing work. And I think if we're going to do that, it starts with those who have committed themselves to Christ and therefore have committed their hearts to make this thing work. Again, I think legislation is good. We needed that in the 50s and the 60s. We still need it today. But I think by and large, legislation will never be the answer to this issue. It's a heart issue at the core. And only Jesus can deal with the heart.
Dr. Restrepo, in education, you got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think that in education is basically, although you recognize that there are groups that are left behind, you try to find ways, for example, creating programs that examine all campus-wide or, or education throughout the education. The history of racism and exclusion, and don't stay there. Look at other forms as well of exclusion. So you're moving that it's not only, you're not stuck in a racial definition of the 60s, but you realize that there are many ways of exclusion today and that they continue, and how not to keep adding to those forms of exclusion.
President Charles, you got 30 seconds.
About 30 seconds has to be used to accolade what Pastor Anthony Hendrix just stated. If we can get that piece he talking about solved, the rest of it will fall in place, because it's got to be where he indicated. If we can accomplish that, all these other issues will be irrelevant, because they'll be in place. Right. Because we'll see each other as our brothers and our sisters, and that we wouldn't want put any due distress on one that we would want on the other. So that'd be solved. I mean, if we could accomplish what he's talked about, we wouldn't have none of these other issues. All of them will go away instantly.
Well, that's about all of our time. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank our audience for watching. I guess the final conclusion is that we've not reached Dr. King's dream yet, but we've certainly made a tremendous amount of progress. With that, we'll see you next month.